Let's say hello to Jeff Sentell here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Jeff, sorry for getting to you a little late here because there's a lot of folks who want to hear a lot of really good recruiting information with you. I want to start with 2025 quarterbacks here for a moment and sort of work backwards and work our way more to the present tense. You know, the other day at DawgNation.com, a very interesting story as it relates to JuJu Lewis. He has kind of come out with another announcement, another crop of visits here that he's getting ready to take during the month of March. And you know, the chatter that we see online and obviously your own personal private conversations is that it does seem like Georgia is legitimately in the mix here, perhaps even more than just a hat on the table here for right now. Technically speaking, still committed to USC, I guess. He is visiting the Trojans, I believe, at the end of the month. But as we kind of talk about 2025 quarterbacks here for a moment, let me start with the Lewis part of this, that we're kind of led to believe that in very complicated recruitings that involve, we would assume, a lot of NIL and a lot of, you know, sort of aggressive sort of suitors in addition to Georgia. That's not always Georgia's cup of tea, but perhaps is that different when it comes to Julian Lewis in this situation? Let's start right there, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Hey, good morning, everybody. Brandon, like the sweater. That's a very old school type letter sweater you got going on.
Thank you.
You know, I think our Connor Riley had a good term for it. You know, Connor has a great cynical sense of humor sometimes, but he called it a situationship, how he described his reading of how things are with USC and JuJu Lewis. He's going to take a bunch of visits, man, and he's going to take – those are all unofficial visits, I've been told. And then he's going to probably take some more visits, some official visits. I think the thing you're kicking at, Brent, I don't know if you saw the story this week. It was a Yahoo.com report, how they estimated that JuJu made about $10 million over 2 years at Southern Cal. And of course, not all of that was collective. It was I wasn't familiar with this, but he had like a Wendy's deal. He had a Dr. Pepper deal.
You're talking about Caleb Williams, right?
Yeah. Caleb Williams. Yeah. And I guess the comparative statement there is like, is that the sort of things that's going to be there for JuJu should he stick with his USC commitment? I don't know. I think USC learned a little bit. First of all, my first reaction to that story, if they were paying that much, but again, it's not them paying that much. It's being that big of a star and then drawing in the non-collective funds. I think my thinking on Julian and Georgia is if Georgia does win the race for Julian, his father has told me that, you know, they're not going to take the highest bid. The highest bid, they're not currently committed to the highest bid. And I think it's going to have to take the power, maybe peripheral brands in the state of Georgia. It's not going to be the money coming in or the collective money coming in that I think would ultimately sway should Julian choose Georgia. I think it would be big national brands, and I've already exceeded my free plug with one national brand in this answer already. So I'll just stick to, you know, the big boys, you know, the grade A's that are around the state of Georgia. And that's kind of what Stetson Bennett got a little bit of and Brock Bowers got a little bit of. But if you multiply that with a quarterback that's a Heisman Trophy candidate, I think you can get into some real money where it's not exhausting Georgia's collective to allocate that many dollars to QB1. I think he's going to really look around. It's interesting how Colorado is now in the picture because they hired a former NFL coordinator, and that's a lot of NFL experience. I really think Julian just wants to play ball. This is a very complicated time in his life. He knows he's going to get his money wherever he goes, but I think one thing that I believe will happen with Julian at the college level is that money, he's going to let his father handle all that, kind of be his advocate, his agent for a lot of that. All he wants to do is play ball and win. And I think the main reason Georgia's in this thing, and I really think they are in this thing, Brandon, is because he knows he's going to win. And he told me point blank, he's like, Georgia's going to have players like me, except they're like 100 pounds heavier and 6 or 7 inches taller. He wants to be surrounded by similar talents to go chase championships.
So let me try to be intellectually consistent here for a moment, which maybe not always the easiest thing for me to do. But I just spent about 10 minutes off the top of the show saying Kirby Smart talks about offensive and defensive linemen, and that in the next phase of NIL, which I believe is going to be more like the allocation phase of, okay, you've raised all the dollars you can raise, how are you going to choose to spend them? Jeff, I believe if I had, like, let's say it's $2 million, I could give Julian Lewis $2 million, or I could use $2 million to get the best offensive line for the quarterback that does eventually start for Georgia. I think I'm at the phase now where I think I'd rather have the elite offensive line than the elite quarterback. Georgia won 2 national championships with a quarterback who became a Heisman finalist, was only a second-round pick, and was not an elite recruit coming out of high school. And I'm not saying that I don't want elite quarterback, or I'm not saying that I don't want elite wide receiver. But the truth is, listen to Kirby Smart talk, elite offensive lines may be more rare than elite quarterback and wide receiver. And if everybody's chasing those skill positions with the dollars, then dadgummit, Jeff, maybe Georgia's just better off putting a whole bunch of money in the direction of the very best offensive line that it can get, letting somebody else battle it out for the quarterback, find a good quarterback to play behind a great offensive line, and start stacking some more trophies.
Yeah, I'm going to ride with you a little bit on that one, Brandon. I think one of the things I'm watching, and that it's been clear to me while watching the NFL Combine coverage, is Georgia only has one defensive lineman there. And to me, that's probably the reason why Georgia wasn't Georgia a year ago. Georgia was very good. Georgia was a top 2, top 3, top 1 team last year, but they weren't the Georgias of the years past, or those elite defensive linemen, those elite front guys. Georgia went through a stretch. We all know Trayvon Walker, Jordan Davis, Jalen Carter, Devontae Wyatt. They didn't have exactly one of those dudes on last year's team. Now, I think Nazir Stackhouse, Warren Brinson, those guys will come back. Those guys will really help Georgia out a lot. And those guys will probably end up day 3 picks, maybe day 2, day 3 picks. They'll be 3rd, 4th round type defensive linemen, maybe a little higher for Nazir. But I think the difference is purely, I think I've tried to be, like you said, intellectually consistent. I'm trying to be rationally consistent. I've always, when I look at recruiting, I think big people that move people around, that push people around offensive and defensive lines are very much still the nature of the game. You watch the NFL, Brandon, when it gets to the playoffs, all those teams that threw it 30, 40 times a game, they start running the ball. And that's how they advance through the playoff bracket in the postseason in January. I still think that's football, no matter how much they try to change it into kind of underwear Olympics or glorified 7-on-7 with pass routes and how much you can literally lay your hands on receivers. I think about this NIL, Brandon, in the days going forward, and it reminds me of late 90s, early 2000s as how frustrating it was to follow the Atlanta Braves because they just weren't spending. Or if they spent a lot of money on their pitching staff, they had to go with a mediocre and average talent for the National League at first base or third base, or they would have to plug with a lot of rookies. And other teams were spending a lot more. I think it is going to be, in some respects, a salary cap league. And I like the way you're thinking. It's a rational way to share that message in terms of if you're spending all your money on your quarterback, who's going to protect him? Like Georgia's got a model. Somehow they're winning. I think it's 69-6 since 2019. They're winning without first-round quarterbacks, without first-round receivers. They're winning with a Georgia model. And I don't think Kirby Smart really needs to change that drastically. And I think the Julian piece is just very interesting because I think the hardest part of the whole Julian Lewis to Georgia saga storyline is I don't expect him to come in right away at Georgia and play. I have that much confidence in a Gunnar Stockton, and I have that much confidence in a Ryan Puglisi. But the flip side of that is no freshman quarterback has really came in and played for Kirby Smart except for Jacob Eason and then Jake Fromm. Now, those were kind of dire situations where they didn't have 4 stars, 5 stars stacked up in the room as well. And I think Georgia's kind of way with their young quarterback is sending them through a year of the gauntlet scout team practices where that future all-pro defense kind of chews on them. And then Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo know exactly what they have. And that's kind of the way Georgia has groomed quarterbacks over the years. I think that's why Carson Beck's so successful. I think that's why Stetson Bennett was so successful. And I think that's going to be interesting to look at in the years to come.
So going kind of rapid fire here for a little bit, you know, a guy that you've written about at DawgNation.com, Matt Zollers, 4-star. He kind of reminds me of this year's version of Ryan Puglisi a little bit. I think he has a chance to be an Elite 11 quarterback. He's sort of ranked inside the top 200, but he's not ranked inside, like, say, the top 50. And he's certainly not a 5-star here right now. Is this the kind of quarterback then that we're talking about? And I'm not anti-JuJu. I'm really, really not. Obviously, I'm not. But is someone like Zollers a little bit more in keeping with what we're saying here, which is if you can have the best offensive line, good at quarterback might be good enough. Is that what Matt Zollers perhaps is going to end up being?
Well, it's funny, Brandon. There's been a bit of a news flash with Zollers. I think people have started to look at him. They started to kick the tires on that junior tape. And Ironically, On3 now has Zollers rated higher than JuJu on their pure On3 rating. Zollers, I believe, is the number 17 overall prospect for On3, number 3 quarterback in the country. JuJu's like number 22. So that's interesting. I think Zollers has reached the point he's going to be, Brandon. It's going to keep going up for him. He's going to be a he's already top 85 on the On3 industry ranking and climbing. And this is a guy, Brandon, I love this part of his story. He was very forthright. He didn't have an offer this time a year ago. Brandon, that's very strange, very peculiar in this day and age. You see that highlight clip right there? I had to watch it about 2 or 3 times. He literally lets that ball go, and the ball travels like 61 yards, 62 yards in the air. The thing about him is he's a former receiver. He's a former running back. He is very, very fast. Like the first play on this tape is a 70-yard run where he makes a defensive end miss. So Zollers, trying to keep with the speed of your pace of your questioning here, I think you're going to find out he's going to be as highly rated as anybody when all the rankings are done.
We just